PA Books is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to the PA Books Podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. PA Books features interviews with authors of books about Pennsylvania history, culture, and people. In this episode, we talk with artist Karl Kuerner and writer Bruce Mowday about their book, Emotional Brandywine.
This week on PA Books, Karl Kuerner and Bruce Mowday, authors of Emotional Brandywine.
Karl Kuerner and Bruce Mowday are the authors of Emotional Brandywine. Karl, you say in the book that this has its origins in the 1970s. Why that far back?
Well, growing up in Chadds Ford, that's my home, and just experiencing growing up on my grandparents' farm and around the area, and being in the heart of the Brandywine Valley. And knowing that skirmishes of the Battle of the Brandywine took place, it just added to extra romance and magic to it.
Now, this is an area that's been your home for a long time. If you had to explain to somebody who hasn't been there before, what's special about it?
I think it's just nestled in the Philadelphia suburbs. It still has a little bit of magic and history to it that's undisturbed. It's been encroached by suburbia so much, but through the art world and the Battle of the Brandywine, obviously, it seems like it's held a special. The only thing I can think of is the word magic to it, and it really has enveloped me my whole life. Bruce, you also live in the area and have a lot of experience there. You've written books about things that have happened down there. What's special to you about that area?
Really, Karl and I, we spent some time just walking around the battlefield, and I've done it with other people, and you really get a sense of history for the Brandywine. You can almost feel George Washington being there, and Lafayette and a lot of the other great leaders, but it's also such a pretty place. It's known as horse country. Karl, being one of the famous artists there today, has taken over the mantle of some other artists in the area. You just really got to go and experience it. It's so much to do there, and it's pretty, and it just keeps the history alive.
Why has it become an area where artists are drawn to it?
I think it goes back to Howard Pyle, and his school of illustration, and worked with such greats as Frank Schoonover and Harvey Dunn and Andrew Wyeth and that type of thing. And there's a pureness to it. There still is, I think.
I think it's right, and Karl actually lives really close to where Pyle had his school. You can almost see it from your hill, I guess.
Yeah, just about, yeah.
And it's continued. Of course, there's the Brandywine River Museum of Art there, and the Pyle legacy to N.C. Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth and Jamie Wyeth, and Karl is so connected in his family to the Wyeths, and they've been used as, I guess, models for some of the Wyeth paintings, and Karl has just kept that the whole spirit alive with his own inflections and with his own spirit. Actually, that's a good word. Good emotional spirit of Karl to keep it alive.
Now, you mentioned the museum. Are other artists continuing to come into the area and find inspiration there?
I think it's a magnet for people from outside the area to come. I think young artists or established artists still want to get some sort of feeling of it, and it's just a continuation. But there's very few homegrown Brandywine artists anymore. So I guess I'm getting older.
Actually, I was thinking about that, and I think you're right. Karl's kind of the dean, I guess, of the artists of the moment.
Now, you've been on this show before for your previous book, Emotional Gettysburg. How did you get from that book to this book?
Well, the Emotional Gettysburg book's done very well through several printings, and Karl and I were sitting, what do we do next? And we had discussed maybe doing something on Antietam, but the thought struck us, and I'm not sure why we didn't think of it earlier, was we're both here in Brandywine, and Karl's right there on basically on the skirmish area of the battlefield, and I'm former president of the Brandywine Battlefield Park Associates. It just seemed natural once we thought about it, so that's how we kind of transitioned.
And Brandywine was, correct me if I'm wrong, but was the largest land battle of the Revolution.
That's right.
And probably the least known. So it just seemed like a natural to get it to be a little bit more recognized from our end anyway.
Yes, and I think it's getting a little bit more recognition. I know when I did my book on the first one on the Battle of the Brandywine, I was, did some research on London, and they very much knew about the American Revolution, but they didn't know about the Battle of the Brandywine, and that was one of their big victories. And since this was a major defeat for Washington, he never wrote about it, and the British lost the war. So Brandywine got kind of lost, but especially now with the connection with Lafayette and people realizing that's when he really became the American hero, when he was wounded at Lafayette. And Karl did such a great painting of remembering Lafayette at Brandywine in our book. I think it's starting to get a lot more notice, and it's another great reason to do our book, Emotional Brandywine.
Now, one of the paintings, Birmingham Meeting Fog, has some significance there. It is the first one that's in the book. How did you decide that would be the first painting?
How did we, or did the designer?
For me, it's a lot of the soldiers from the battle were buried there. Am I correct on that?
There's some there that's correct. And with the fog also, it was a foggy day, or it was a lot of fog on September the 11th with the rain and everything, and the heat, and Karl just, I'll repeat this 25 times. Karl's paintings are just wonderful, and that really gives you that feeling of that day, and it's more than just that day, it's the future and the present too. And if you take a look at that painting.
Well, I find that August, September, the early morning, and the humidity and the fog rising, and you go through a cemetery to have that eeriness. It's the art of solitude, and I think that's what I felt about that.
So how do you work together? Bruce, you're writing, Karl, you're painting. Do you come up with the idea for the painting first and then do the writing? What's that process like?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and answer that one. At least from my point of view, I've never gone to Bruce and say, what do you think if I paint this? Like, he's pretty much said, paint what you feel, and that's what Wyeth's always taught me, and I'll go from there. And so I've had paintings I did in the 70s up to the present for this book, and so in my mind, the book started in the 70s because of my heritage and history and finding artifacts on our farm property and so on, and showing Bruce some of these early paintings. It lent, in my mind, Bruce a chance to do his creative genius.
Thank you, Karl. Actually, that's right. I would never, ever dictate to Karl, go paint this scene, because that's not how artists work. And Karl has this great inspiration. I think out of the two books, I suggested maybe it'd be nice if it be a painting of one or the wheat field in Gettysburg, because that's where one of my relatives was wounded during the Battle of Gettysburg, and I know I made a pitch for something with Lafayette in the emotional Brandywine, but no way I dictated it. And with Karl's paintings and with my research, they all lent to tell a story of something of the battle and the history. And then I interviewed Karl, and he would tell me why he selected that scene and what made it inspirational to him and what the emotion behind it. And it really all just kind of meshed. There was no issues in me getting the copy and doing the essays to match Karl's paintings, but they all started with Karl's inspiration.
I found the difference between doing Gettysburg and Brandywine. You can go up to Gettysburg and there's Devil's Den, there's the wheat field, Culp's Hill. You go to Brandywine, see that development there? That was, where the corridor of the British came up, where those 200 houses are now. So it was so much more of a challenge to take myself back into time to see the pureness of what I felt Brandywine was. And yet there's still areas, like I said, that still have the Conservancy thrill of it because it's still the way it is, but it's so much less than Gettysburg.
Very much, and we along the way we had some help early on when we were looking for scenes and stories. Some of the people at the old Kennett Meeting House, and this stood, and as a matter of fact, was part of the early engagements of the Battle of the Brandywine. And it's only open a couple Sundays a year, but I knew some people there, and we got an inside tour of it, and that gave a very special feeling. And Karl was looking, and he did there and several other places. A lot of these areas have been painted before many times, but Karl wanted to do something different. And instead of having an outside look at the old Kennett Meeting House, we had a chance to do the tour inside. And Karl, why don't you talk about the window painting that I really love?
Well, that's probably one of the most important ones to me, because how buildings change over 200 years or so on, but the interior of the Kennett Meeting's pretty much as is. In fact, you go in some of the pews there, and there's carvings of initials from the kids back then, with the dates and so on. And I decided to go up on the second floor and get it almost like a ethereal look down at the girl who posed for Shay Allen in her colonial garb. It was very moving to me, because having her look out the window, the anticipation of what was to come and what is to be, and the uncertainty of that era, that time, of whoever would be looking at that, the British coming, and what's the future, what's going to happen,
That was the perfect, and I think that really was the essence of the book, where Shay was looking out the window, and was she just there at the date of the battle, watching the battle outside the window, or is it more into the future? What did the battle do in winning our independence, and what's in the future for us? So actually that painting is really central to the whole key to the whole book, because with the Emotional Gettysburg book, we have people say they read the book and Karl's paintings, and they don't look at Gettysburg the same way, because it's more than just a book about the battle. It's about what it means to us and about our future.
Well, how many books have been written about Gettysburg?
Way too many. I tell people I had never thought about writing about a book, because I think there's actually 20 or 30,000 books on Gettysburg.
And probably a little less on Brandywine.
Probably a little less on Brandywine.
But it just that picture to me was they're all important, but I think it gives the viewer a chance to imagine a little bit.
The John Chandhouse painting also, and when it's painted, it's usually from the front, from the road across from the Chadsford Historical Society. But Karl said, I want to paint it as Washington saw it, and he was actually in the back of the house.
And if you notice, there's a misty fog in that one too.
Yeah.
And I did that in the 90s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, it's really great. And we have Osborne's Hill. Again, it's glimpses. The book is something you won't get if you just kind of go and tour the area. But Osborne's Hill, very central location for the British command during the fighting late in the afternoon of September 11th. And it's basically private property. And Karl got to know the people there, and we had a really interesting tour of it. Karl was up there a couple of times, and you want to tell the story of the painting?
Well, I think it's a lone British soldier overlooking the valley, and from what I was told, there was a soldier there that had been killed and was left, and was actually buried on the property, and eventually, his remains were moved to another facility years later. But I think just goes to show how in and out, how fast the Battle of the Brandywine was, as opposed to a 3-day battle and that type of thing, where the British is just almost running ramshot into Philly.
And the reason the body was moved was one of the owners of the property was a little unhinged, I guess, or a little squeamish about having a British soldier buried on her property, and that was the reason it was turned and moved. But there's some of the graves are integral to the Battle of the Brandywine. Was there. Karl mentioned going through the graveyard at the at the Meeting House, the Lafayette Cemetery that they now call it, and also at the Old Kennett Meeting House, because there's some Hessian soldiers that are buried there. So it's very much a remembrance, along with look at the future of what happened there.
Now, the painting you were talking about of the soldier left behind
Yes.
on the Osborne Hill, it depicts a scene in winter. Why did you pick winter?
I think, again, soldier left behind, time goes on, and having that soldier not fresh off the battlefield, but having the coldness of the loneliness of being forgotten. And it just seemed more towards late fall, early winter.
With both the books, Karl painted scenes, different seasons, and Karl is right that this is not Gettysburg's not just July 1, 2, and 3. It's there all year, and the winter scenes are great. And the same way with Battle of the Brandywine, it should be more. It should be known for more than just something that happened on September the 11th.
Now, Karl, you say that strong feelings emanating from the battlefield are the foundation of the book, and certainly it's in the title of this book. How important are these emotions? What do they mean for you as an artist?
Well, again, it's part of my root system, growing up in this little valley and knowing what took place there as I grew up. And there was a little historian by the name of Chris Sanderson in Chadsford, and who was a self-proclaimed, I believe, authority on the Battle of the Brandywine. And even as a child growing up, you would visit Chris, and he would just, the way he talked with a lot of bravado about that, the battle and so on. And then again, growing up in the Kuerner farm and so on, and plowing the fields and so on, and all of a sudden you come across a musket ball, or a piece of Dutch pipe, or flints from the flintlock, and you're holding something that is such an important part of history that it's the foundation of our country, and it just has been embedded in my mind. I mean, I still go out you feel it. I don't know how else to put it. You just feel it.
Now you mentioned Chris Sanderson, and there's a famous photo that you reference of him with Andrew Wyeth.
Yes.
And that's part of one of the stories of one of the paintings that has one of the blue historic markers that we see around. What's that photo about, and why is it important?
Well, I had done the painting of the footnote, and believe it or not, then I discovered there's a picture of Wyeth and Sanderson there. It's like, Andy had, grew up in this world of history, and having his father being such a well-known illustrator, and hearing Wyeth talk a little bit about the Battle of the Brandywine, which came to him through Chris Anderson, believe it or not, so when I did that painting, I did not realize, I was just as surprised when I came across the photo of Andy and Chris there, but I never, as often as I'm on the highway, I don't usually see people pulled over and actually reading those signs. Maybe they do, but I'm just not there.
You get hit on some of those roads that are a little too busy.
Yeah.
Phil, early on you asked what makes the Brandywine so special, and actually I think Chris Sanderson and people like him, characters. A lot of areas have characters, but Chris is very much, he lived in Washington's headquarters with his mother. He didn't drive, so he was a fixture of hitchhiking rides. He was a fiddler. I remember as a kid, he had his own radio show, and I used to Sunday afternoon listen to Chris Sanderson on the radio. But it's all part of the Chadds Ford, Chester County, Brandywine lore, I think.
Talk more about that lore. Is that something? Are there memories of the battle that have been passed down generation to generation in the area?
I think early on, yes. There's a great diary of a Quaker lad who got caught up during the battle and wrote down memoirs later, and that kept some of it going. Bayard Taylor, famous author from the 1800s, actually his brother was killed on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, but one of the first things he wrote was taking a tour of the Brandywine battlefield and what it meant to him. Over the years, though, I think it very much has lessened, and actually when my book came out on the battle itself, a lot of people told me, gee, we didn't know what happened here. We pass this all the time, and so it's a shame that a lot of our history is starting to fade away a little bit, but I think emotional Brandywine, emotional Gettysburg is starting to bring it back, and it deserves to be remembered.
Karl, growing up there, you're on the battlefield, you're surrounded by it. Was it something that people were conscious of, that they talked about?
I think from the Kuerner view was, how many bales of hay can we get in today? not as, it wasn't talked about as much because the center part was making a living, with my father and grandfather and the farming, and the highlight for us, the spring plowing or the fall plowing, and then you hope you get a lot of rain, and then you might find something, and again, Brandywine Valley is probably known more for the arts than the Battle of Brandywine, and it's a shame, really, but I do think like the paintings that Howard Pyle did or Schoonover and those folks still have a lure to the viewer that's exposed to it, and there's something that drew everybody in, and again, the word magic to it comes to mind to me.
Now, the earliest one, remembrance of the Battle of the Brandywine and the park itself, my parents used to bring my sister, brother, and I there to tire us out because they have big rolling hills. My dad worked at Capitol Bakery, so a pack of sticky buns and running up and down those hills would put us out for the night. So that was my earliest remembrance of going to the battlefield.
One of the paintings is called Philadelphia Campaign, and it depicts a man named Tom Stolfi. Who is he?
He was a volunteer at the Brandywine battlefield, and I got to know him a little bit, and he was a reenactor, and quite a good one, too, because he had lost a leg, so he really fit into it with his prosthesis and so on.
Absolutely. He was a volunteer when I was president of the board of the Battlefield Park, and he was always out willing to spread the word about the history, loved to dress up in that uniform, and it was painful, his leg. I remember talking to him about it, but he was just a wonderful person. And actually, it was one of the first times I met Karl, I think.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while that Karl did the painting, and he was selling some prints to raise money, maybe for the Sanderson Museum. I was selling some of my books at the Sanderson and bought one of the prints because I knew Tom, and that was...
Well, that fellow really fit the reenactment mode.
Yes.
I mean, you could go back in time and probably find him.
What's the significance? Certainly, he's an individual.
Yes.
How does the painting take people beyond the individual and represent, say, the principle of the citizen soldier?
I think, at least in my mind, look into the eyes of the painting, and there's a vision in those eyes that very powerful. That we won't be beaten. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Also, the setting with in Philadelphia at Independence Hall and the big moon, you know, that was the soldier fighting for our country very much.
We'll be back in a moment with the PA Books Podcast.
Enjoying this podcast? Please support PCN with a donation at pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Karl, when you're painting a site, do you paint on the site, or do you go out and sketch and come back?
I do something called a lot of thumbnail sketches, which are maybe like 3 by 4 inches. I'm not one to worry about doing the detail in a drawing. I get enough of an idea down, and then get back to the studio and just let it flow. And if I have to go back to the setting, I'll still take my drawing book and make my little notes and so on. But I'm careful to not to be photorealistic, but enough to let the painting take the viewer to a certain point and let the viewer's imagination go further than the painting.
Bruce, when you're engaging with Karl's paintings, do you then go out to visit the site, or how do you work that?
It's lucky, with these 2 books, I've probably been to both sites many times, but when we did Gettysburg, it was how we started, that we went out several days together, and we kind of toured the battlefield together, and at Brandywine, we both knew the sites, so when I viewed Karl's finished painting, then I could do the research and kind of figure out what I was speaking. He did a great one called Flintlock with the mechanism of the rifle, and that gave me a chance to get into history and say what the weapons were like and how they were made, and I can always take a lead off what Karl's painted and then try to tell a little bit of the history along with it.
Right. I think I would say, Bruce, here's a finished piece. This is what I felt about when I did it. Now run with it, and so it's like you asked me a little bit ago. Does Bruce tell me what to paint? I don't tell him what to write.
And it's worked out perfect. Like Karl's paintings are so inspirational. It gives me a chance to say, oh yeah, I can talk about a subject maybe not usually written about, like in Gettysburg. And Karl, as you now know, grew up on the farm, but he did some of the farm animals up in Gettysburg, and that gave me a chance to talk about the loss of horses and animals and stuff during the battle. So it just kind of all kind of meshes together.
So when you initially write, when you see a painting for the first time, do you take notes and then go back to wherever it is you do your writing, or what's your process like?
Yeah, I like to get Karl send me or Shay will send me a JPEG of it, and so I'll have that image on my computer screen. And that's kind of the first look, and then I can do research, and so I'll have it there, or I can also go back to the scene itself if I want to get some more information. And a big part of it is either sitting face to face with Karl and doing an interview, or having to send some notes, why did you select this, or give me some background, or talk to me about kid growing up in Brandywine and what led to painting that. So part of it is that interview process with Karl. Part of it is looking at the painting and then doing the research on the history. So it's 3 or 4 prongs to put those essays together.
I think one of the hardest parts for me between Gettysburg and Brandywine was you could go to the places in Gettysburg, like I said, the wheat field, and they're still there, or Devil's Den, or Culp's Hill, or Little Round Top, or any of them, and you actually can walk it and the one thing I wanted to do with Gettysburg is have no weapons in that, or monuments in that book. I think the only one was up at Little Round Top with the cathedral that they put up there. And so when the fellows came back, if they were to come back in this day and age, they could see the book and see the pureness of Gettysburg as I would like them to see it. Now with Brandywine, it was so much different because a lot of the places don't exist, or don't have names, or so on, and so you look at some of the paintings, and there's the flintlock or September Pass with that, or a retreat of the Brandywine, and I think it gives you a sense of the foundation of where this country was headed to, and the sacrifice that those fellows made. Not that there wasn't a sacrifice at Gettysburg, but the initial part of the foundation of the country.
And the terrain has changed. The Brandywine River itself has changed. The way it flows. I think it was a lot deeper than what it is today. Because I'll get people who go there and I say, that's not a river, it's a creek. But if you go there after it rains, you would think it's a raging river at times. And trying to find the exact route that the British took to outflank Washington, where they formed up on Osborne Hill, the road's not there anymore. And everybody tries to retrace it. And I was trying to do a map and just really couldn't do it. You couldn't put a modern map and overlay it and show where the roads were. So that you can do that at Gettysburg, but you can't do that at Brandywine.
Now the river itself, has its own personality, and you can experience it at different places. You have one painting fording the Brandywine.
Yes.
Of course, fording is always an issue for rivers. Right. Jeffrey's Ford is one that gets mentioned a few times.
Right.
Where is that? What's interesting about it?
It's not a really big area. It's up.
It's a little Osborne Hill. It's northwest of Osborne Hill a little bit. But what's important is that when the British outflanked George Washington, they went around Washington's right flank and they crossed the Brandywine at 2 different places. And Jeffrey's Ford was the last one where they crossed, and that was very important because Washington didn't think that the British had a place to ford the river that far north of him, and the British had better loyalists that knew the area and led them right around and caused the defeat at Brandywine. But Jeffrey's Ford was very important because that was one of the places the British forded.
I just feel like the Brandywine's so small you could ford it anywhere. That's kind of, let's cross here, let's cross there. But one of my students about 15 years ago was up there and just looked around the bank. You know how water moves things, and he found a Hessian pipe, and it almost in mint condition, and had it identified. And so there's still things that you can pick up. Just not that he was looking for anything. Just history reveals itself.
Were there places that you considered painting and then in the end decided not to?
I think it's the same thing with Gettysburg. There's hundreds of places you could paint, and I think with Brandywine, it might have been a little bit more difficult because of all the developing in some of the areas. But yeah, I think there's things that maybe I could have done that, it comes down to, I think the paintings I did were the ones I was meant to do.
Now, one of the sites is the Brinton House in that area, and your painting of that has a lot of sky and shows the chimney smoke going straight up,
right.
So clearly no wind.
Right.
What were you thinking or what were you feeling?
The quiet of the night before. It's the same thing I did with the painting of Moonlight on the Brandywine. The calmness before the storm. That was a little inn and just quietly minding its own business. But boy, was that in for a surprise.
Now, if you would have painted Kennett Square that night, it would have been a little bit different because the British troops and the officers apparently had a nice time in a couple of the taverns there that night, so there wasn't much calm in Kennett Square, which is where the British formed before they started the morning attack.
Now, you do mention in the book that there was a story of the British discovering a stash of liquor at some location.
Yeah, there were some Wilmington merchants who thought that the British would come up towards Wilmington, so they wanted to keep their liquor safe, and they took it along the Brandywine and put it right in the path of the flanking British Army.
Now, one of the paintings that was really striking deals with the flag, the Brandywine flag, and it's a field of red with the white American flag up in one of the corners. What's significant of that for you?
I find that the Brandywine flag is so well not known, and giving the public a little bit more exposure, and also through Bruce's writing to it, and to give people a chance to get to the main course through his writing, through that painting.
The flag is very distinctive. It was a Pennsylvania regimental flag there at Brandywine, and if you see it, you just remember it. There are, of course, myths, a lot of them untrue. They grow up about Brandywine. One involves the flag, and some people have said that's the first American flag. Well, it wasn't, but it played a central part at Brandywine and has been preserved for us. So it's a really piece of American history that can be preserved, and then we have Karl's painting with that also.
Why do you think people don't really know as much about this battle? You mentioned being in England, and there wasn't much awareness there. What's your sense on that?
Again, Washington didn't write about it. It was a major defeat. If you take a look at some of the TV series on the American Revolution, they hardly ever mention Brandywine itself, and I think that's the main part, and you really have to take a look at it and study it. And if you take a look at the people there, many famous people from George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, and very important for Lafayette, and the history were there. And on the British side, you had General Howe and Cornwallis and Tarleton, the infamous British dragoon. I mean, they were all on the other side. So all the elements were there, but it, again, we lost it. Washington wanted to forget it, so I think it just got lost.
Yeah, we lost the battle. England lost the war. There's the rug, sweep it under.
Pretty much from both sides. Yeah.
Now, Bruce, you've been on the show before about
Yes.
your book, Lafayette at Brandywine.
Right.
Give people a sense of the significance of this battle for him.
Lafayette had just been part of the American Army for just a couple weeks before. He didn't speak English very well. He was a volunteer. He had no people under his command. Most people didn't know who he was. On the morning of September 11th, he was an aide to Washington along with Hamilton and was doing his duty. But by the end of that day, he really was on the road to become an American hero, and a hero that America really needed because we needed support of some European nations, especially France. And without Lafayette, we would not have gotten the support from France that we needed really to defeat the British. And what really established Lafayette was when this flanking movement was discovered and the British were up on Osborne Hill, attacking across Birmingham Hill up towards Birmingham Meeting House. Lafayette went up to Washington and said, I need the help, let me go up. And Washington said, go ahead. And Lafayette gathered some of his own French officers on his staff and rode to Birmingham Hill. And instead of being what some generals would do, would sit back on their horse and direct the men what to do, he got off his horse. He got in front of those troops, tried to steady them, tried to instigate a bayonet charge. And while he was doing that, he was shot through the left leg. And the moment he spilled his blood, everybody knew he was serious about helping us and just not another European general there to get money and put something on their resume. He was dedicated to our freedom, and that it was a very big turning point of the American Revolution. It was right there at Brandywine, and that's what should be remembered about Brandywine.
Now, both your books in the emotional series deal with battlefields, and there's something inherently dramatic about battle. It's life and death circumstances there. Could you do a book like this about something that wasn't a battlefield?
I think I could, because it's all about emotion with me, with whatever I create. There's a love affair with the imagination and romancing and knowing what you paint and getting to know it.
And Karl always inspires me, so I am sure that the scenes would make me look into whatever subject Karl picked and do the writing and the research. Because Karl's not going to do a mundane painting of something that everybody has done. There's inspiration, there's creativity behind everything. So I'd be willing to give it a try. Phil, do you have a subject in mind?
Well, we can talk about that later. I want to talk about a place called Sandy Hollow. What's interesting about that, and what's significant of that for you?
Bruce, I'm going to let you go.
Sandy Hollow was actually an area of the battle after they charged off of Osborne Hill, the British, where the Americans were really in dire need, and they were trying to escape down to Chester. And some of the American troops under General Greene and some of the others put up a valiant stand for a couple hours and really allowed the rest of the Washington's army to escape and reform back to Chester that night. The part of the river ran red with blood, or the tributary back there is what they said. And a lot of people thought that by that defense that the Americans realized they could stand toe-to-toe with the vaunted British Army, one of the best in the world at that point. And it was significant, really. It saved the Americans that day. Some of the British officers wrote, and I read in their journals, they said if they had another 2 hours of daylight, there wouldn't have been a Washington's army left, and what really stymied them and didn't give them that extra time was the defense that was put up at Sandy Hollow. One of those plaques that Karl writes about, it was put up there recently, and it's actually on the farm owned by Randall Spackman, and Randall is a great reenactor, loves history, and allowed us to use some of his uniforms and weapons for the book. And if you take a look in the back of the book, you'll see sketches that Jay did of us, and also the only, I think, photograph from the whole American Revolution, and it was Karl and I was kind of clowning around with Randall's hat and coat and muskets.
Well, one of the unique features of the time was the tricorn hat.
Yes.
And one of the paintings features one of those
Yes.
on a peg with some shadows of
Yes.
soldiers. Karl, what's the significance of that hat for you?
The hat we actually picked up at the Renaissance Fair. And just there's so much history. The tricorn hat is just a symbol, I think, of the times, and hanging it up on the peg, and basically just washing in some colors behind the hat on the peg. It started to take the form of, my goodness, that looks like that could be a soldier there. Oh, wait a second, there's another one there. And then you just go ahead and just play with it. And then all of a sudden this mysterious form starts to come up of soldiers, and you start to feel like, my goodness, there's something happening with this painting. And it almost gives you shivers when you look at it.
And that also gave me a chance to look at a little bit of the history of the tricorner hat. And there, at the time, depending on what they were made of, you could tell a social status as somebody. And on the historical part of it, how you wore the hat. And if you were a soldier, you would wear it off to a side, so it wouldn't interfere with your gun when you bring it down, your rifle. So it actually, it was positionings were different for soldiers.
Now, Karl, when you visit a site, we've talked about how you approach it, and do you feel you need to go back again? So many of these sites in this book are familiar to you, but do you get to a point when you're painting where you're like, you know what, I want to go see that again?
Oh, I've been doing it for 66 years. Always go back. Just feel your roots. I mean, you do a painting, and it's not like one and done. You do want to go back and think about it, and how would you have done it differently? That type of thing. But like I said earlier, the ones you do, the ones are the ones you were meant to do. And I think, this isn't just love them and leave them type paintings. You go back to it.
The terrain really tells you a lot. When I did Pickett's Charge, I did a lot of research, but until I walked that field, and you can really see and you get a feeling for it. And I know when I go to those fields, and I've been to both Brandywine and Gettysburg many different times, and it's just great when you can block out 21st century United States and you can almost feel what it's like to be there at the time of the event taking place. When Karl and I did the first Gettysburg book, one of the first places we stopped was at the end of Pickett's Charge. And Karl and I talked about the experience on the way back, and we both had a little bit of different take on it, but it's to be there, to experience the actual land really helps me with my writing.
Now, one of the paintings is called Silent Drummer, and drummers had played a significant role in armies during that time period. What is the significance of the silent drummer?
Like you overlook the valley and hear that drum beat echoes through.
Karl, was that the one where you got the idea after the last reenactment?
Yeah, yeah, they had the reenactment up in outside of Dilworthtown, and again, I remember there was an older gentleman teaching a 12-year-old how to use the drum and that, and knowing that some of the drummers are probably kids, but just how it's passed along, and I thought, you know, you can go up to a certain spot on any battlefield, and if you're totally by yourself, you can whisk yourself away. But again, hearing just the rhythm and echoing down across the valley, it gives you a feeling.
Now, some of the paintings include a human subject, like the one we were just talking about, but others, you have a tree, or in the thinking bench, you've got the Lafayette sycamore there,
right?
And it has its own personality as well.
Right. Well, every one of them has their own personality, living or not. You know, it's what you experience as a creative person. You know, and imagination sometimes is more important than knowledge, right? So it's
sometimes my imagination gets me in trouble. I need to stick to the facts, so the research is needed.
You know, it's
Karl's can do a little bit more of that.
Uh,
I just think, like with the thinking bench, I did that in the 80s. Again, all that has led up to the culmination of some of this in this book. Take time to think about where life has taken you through history and your own life experiences.
It's a part of the recorded history, and it needs to be preserved. Because if you look back, for a while there wasn't anything written about Brandywine, and the history gets away from us. So that's why it's really important to have Karl's paintings there to preserve this thought.
Why is the tree called the Lafayette sycamore?
It was there during the battle. It was near the Gilpin House, which is sometimes called Lafayette's headquarters, even though he didn't have troops, so it was probably a misnomer. There's debates whether Lafayette actually slept there or not. It doesn't really matter. He was in the area. He knew Gilpin, so you have this wonderful tree that hundreds of years old. There was a sign. It talked a little bit about myths. There was a sign said Lafayette was treated for his leg wound under this tree, and of course that's not true, because he would have been captured by the British, who had the sycamore tree by the time he was wounded. So it's just it's just one of those trees. It's just been there forever, and it spreads out, and it's almost like a grandmother.
I know some of the heavy branches they're cabled together so they don't split. They're so heavy now.
Now, your farm has been the subject of many paintings, and
really,
but it's also the subject of one of your paintings here, Dawn's Early Light.
Yes,
it has an American flag on it. Tell us about that painting.
It's a Kuerner Hill. It's, to me, very personally, it seems like it's a hub of Chadds Ford. It's stayed that way since the battle and so on. It has seen so much history, from the skirmishes of the battle through Andrew Wyeth's tragic accident. You can see all that from that peak of that hill. Andy's painted at my grandparents' farm for over 70 years, and artifacts of the battlefield of the battle have been found there. The painting was done right after 9/11, and through all the tragedy that the country went through then, it just seems like everybody the day after 9/11 need to get an American flag, And of course, we were one of them, but we couldn't find one. So I ended up painting a bed sheet, and that's what's up on the hill as the flag. But there's a foreboding in that picture, and there's hope, and there's a strength of character, and that hill, to me, covers it all.
It's very scenic, and there's no housing developments anyplace, so
Yeah.
That's also good.
Now, you mentioned that these paintings have been worked on over many years.
Yes.
Can they be seen together any place?
No, I don't think so. Different private collectors have them. Maybe someday we can organize an exhibit to bring them together. That would be a wonderful thing.
So if people wanted to visit some of these sites, some of them are certainly private property.
Yes.
Others perhaps are publicly accessible. How would people go about trying to find some of them?
The Tourist Bureau has some information. There's a state park, the Brandywine Battlefield State Park. They'll offer some tours, or if you're lucky, you can get Karl and I to give a little private tour, maybe.
Once people read this book, what do you want people to take away from it?
Maybe lost but not forgotten, but refining Brandywine again.
I think it's also the spirit of independence. This is where our country really began, and this is just a prime example of the sacrifices made for our freedom. And I'm hoping people delve back to our history and actually do their own research rather than trying to get some of the revisionist history that's now going on.
We've been speaking with Karl Kuerner and Bruce Mowday. They are the authors of the book Emotional Brandywine. Thank you both for joining me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you so much.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PA Books, as well as other PCN programs, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.